Mindless fun is probably what I would describe Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. It's a callback to a better time in this AAA games industry, I would say about a decade or so ago, in which we had a lot of experiences like this, that leaned into just being a fun shooter experience that you really could put the controller down, come back to later on. You're not forced into this giant overall experience that's been worked on for about a decade, with hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars invested into the project, with live service ambitions that span maybe a decade or so. That seems like every single project that we've been talking about on this channel endlessly in terms of their eventual failures. And it feels like a lot of those experiences are driven by market research. But Warhammer really leans into the identity of what people wanted from a Space Marine sequel, and it honestly is just a really fun time. And I cannot understate that enough. But if you actually check the Steam reviews for this game, it is very positive right now, about 80% with 50,000 plus reviews. On OpenCritic, it is pretty much the same story from critics overall. 82 top critic average, with 86% of critics recommending the experience. Some of the top outlets such as Eurogamer saying Space Marine 2's campaign is a spectacular and most thrilling follow-up to the original, but the game's grisly combat shines best in its cooperative operations mode. And then we saw GameRant giving it 4 out of 5, saying even without knowing the lore around Warhammer 40k, Space Marine 2 does a good job inviting new fans in the franchise by showing the unwavering courage, sacrifice, and devotion of these super soldiers. But that doesn't mean things are dumbed down to disrespect diehard fans. Being a veteran of the franchise isn't essential to the enjoyment of Space Marine 2. While it might further satisfy the experience, the universe is brought to life with such detail that it makes for the perfect getaway for newcomers. And then IGN giving it an 8 out of 10, saying Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 may not break the third-person shooter mold, but it looks amazing, makes good use of its Warhammer lore, and has brutal combat that just feels great. And that last part is exactly what would summarize my last few hours with the experience, just extremely gritty fun. Now, we have also seen amazing success so far. This is what the story is. As you can see on GameRant, it's already an incredible sales success. It's the fastest selling game ever worked on by Saber Interactive, with it having about 225,000 players in its first 24 hours. Obviously, we already have the overwhelmingly positive user and critic reviews. So yeah, this is just another great game. And it feels like entering into 2024, I wasn't really expecting much, but we've had some really good surprises so far. But this love so far for Space Marine 2 isn't entirely universal. PC Gamer giving the game a 60 out of 100, saying after a rip-roaring first impression, the long-awaited sequel quickly runs out of steam. And there are a couple other reviews like that, especially from users. And myself, this is a game that I really didn't have any expectations with, and I've just genuinely had a fun time getting immersed into this universe for really the first time. I'm not really that big of a Warhammer fan, never really been too big into this franchise at all. I've had a couple of other experiences, I should note, but this is my first time really giving into a game like this, and I've enjoyed it. But it is funny though, looking at this PC Gamer review score of a 60 out of 100, comparing that to what they gave Gollum. Remember that game, Gollum, a game that barely functioned and was a travesty. They give it a 64. They're giving this a 60. I find that rather astonishing, but hey, the AAA games industry, the gaming journalism circuit, they love these rather baffling scores. I swear every outlet does this every once in a while. We had Black Myth Wukong, remember Screen Rant giving the game a 6 out of 10 because it didn't have enough diversity. That was baffling. Then there was last year Wired when they reviewed Hogwarts Legacy. There is no magic in Hogwarts Legacy. They gave it a 1 out of 10 because they didn't like the outside politics of somebody that wasn't even a part of the game's development. That is what you're going to get from games media, and they do dictate how these games are made, especially with coverage reviews like this, because game developers and publishers have very much said in the past that they live and die by review scores, and really the Metacritic overall review score. So yes, a lot of these different gaming developers are trying to appease reviewers like this. So there is a reason why these games are skewed sometimes to the views of outlets like IGN, PC Gamer, GameSpot, the Access Media, the same outlets that do a lot of the marketing for these games. Now, recently there's been a lot of conversation surrounding this video coming from Asmongold. It was a reaction to another YouTuber's video, and I actually want to play a little bit of that video because I mean, that's what Asmongold was reacting to. And this is what he had to say. The first minute I'm only going to show. You can watch the rest. I'll leave a link in the description down below. But it's pretty much what I've been saying throughout this video.
So much masculinity that I feel like I've been in a desert for the last few years. It has themes that nobody wants to go near anymore. For courage and honor, for brotherhood, for the Emperor.
I mean, I do think that a lot of publishers, game developers do want to touch that stuff, but then it comes down to market research and what's popular, what's going to attract a casual audience, and themes like that isn't exactly appealing to the wider margins, which so many of these publishers want to reach with, even if a franchise like, say, Gears of War started out that way, or Saints Row. Saints Row is a great example of that. What it started off being, and then the remake totally just forgot about that or ignored all of that because it strived for the modern audience that doesn't exist, and it never has.
It's so good. It's such a fun game. But the entire time while I was playing it, I couldn't help but shake this feeling of nostalgia. Like the game reminds me of something I've lost, something that we have lost.
Because we used to have a lot of these games. This was the 2000s. People can act like this didn't exist, but we have more games being made nowadays. But what has changed about the industry is that a lot of these executives are striving for that recurrent consumer spending, or trying to make these giant experiences that can make their franchise the next big thing. And what that does is that neglects the audience that was already there, because they usually get left behind. That's what we've seen with a lot of the beloved franchises that existed like 20 or so years ago and that have continued on, and they've really faltered.
You know, I used to play a lot of games. I still play a lot of games, but I used to play a lot more. Games were far more consumable. You pick it up, I could put it down, I could enjoy it for a while, I could play it with my friends, and I could leave it and not feel guilty for doing so. But we've gotten away from that.
I agree.
Space Marine 2 is one of those games. I've picked it up, I've played it, I've enjoyed it, I've played it with some friends, I plan on playing more of it and doing some of the co-op and the PvE and all that good stuff, but at the exact same time, I'm not committed to it. I can walk away at any moment. And while you may say that's true for other games, I think that we've lost that feeling. And I want to talk about that.
He's on the money with that opinion, and that pretty much is what Asmongold was responding to. I only watched a little bit of Asmongold's reaction, but it was pretty much the same thing. He was agreeing with this, pretty much praising that we're finally seeing people waking up and saying that this is exactly what the gaming industry has lost and what it used to be about. And what's interesting about this is more so the response we got here. Matthew Karch, this is the same CEO of Saber Interactive. He said some other stuff in the past. This was him earlier the year saying, you can make great games at a price that isn't going to kill someone's bank account. And yeah, here he supposedly is. And there's also this individual, Ollie Hollis, who appears to be the creative director of the game. Now, I have seen some people doubting if this is actually, the individuals as they are. Is this just like fake accounts? Because there's no way of verifying this unless you have like 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. It's kind of one of the issues with, I would suppose, YouTube comment sections. You never know if these individuals truly are who they say they are. But what's notable about Ollie, who is the creative director of the game, is the fact that if you click on his profile, this is quite clearly it's the same guy. I mean, he has performance capture stuff that he used to work on years ago, and if you actually look up his name, it directly links to this YouTube channel. And these comments have been around for a couple of days now. They could have gone against it, they haven't. But what's very notable is what Matthew Karch says here. He says, "Hey man, CEO of Saber here. I love your videos. We signed the deal to make Space Marine 2. All I wanted was a throwback game. We had the chance to work on something which was, by nature, old school. I can't even comprehend many of the current games that we play these days. They are too complex and too much of an investment, very much so. There's just too... I guess live service is a great example of that. So many games that want you to log in daily, you have to really be invested in it, and you really can't drop down the controller. You're going to miss out on so much, and I think the problem is that people really only stay connected with maybe one or two live service games, and they stick with those games. They're not going to go out. They're not going to continue playing something else. They're going to stick with the games that they love, and that's kind of been proven time and time again with all these live service failures, which are trying to grab audiences that don't exist or grab players from other games that don't want to leave those games. We worked on Halo back in the day, and that game could be distilled down to the simplest of shooting loops, but it was entirely addicting, very much so. This is what we wanted to recapture. I hope that games like Space Marine 2 and Wukong are the start of a reversion to a time when games were simply about fun and immersion. I spent some time as chief operating officer at Embracer, and I saw games there that made me want to cry with their overblown attempts at messaging or imposing morals on gamers. Now, Embracer Group, I believe, used to own Volition before they shut down, and they obviously worked on Saints Row, the remake, a game that the central premise was you trying to pay off student loans. that I do wonder if that's what he's referring to here, but there's probably other examples I'm not even thinking of. He says, we just want to do some glory kills and get their heart rate up a little. For me, that is what games should be about. And I wouldn't say entirely all games, but a lot of games should be that. And I do miss the days in which you could just play a game for maybe 8 to 10 hours, you finish the campaign, and you move on. But a lot of these games have these larger than life ambitions. They want to be these live services for 10 years, and ultimately they're always planning out stuff like 10 years ahead instead of concentrating on the day one product. And I feel like that's what's missing from this industry. I do think that the AAA games industry is starting to get the wake-up call, especially after you have $100 million after $100 million flop. Now, the creative director of the game here, he said, I wrote Space Marine 2 along with Craig Sherman, Randy Bagel, and Matthew Garcia Dunn. Hearing everything you have to say about the story and characters resonate so strongly with our actual approach. It's great to hear you calling out the exact things that we intentionally focused on. It was a 4.5 year of intense work and passion, and watching videos like this makes it all worth it. And so far, again, I haven't finished the campaign. I'm only a couple of hours in, probably around the halfway mark, but I've very, very much enjoyed my time with it. Just a genuine fun experience, and we need more of that from this gaming industry, especially games that lean into what core audiences wanted 10 or so years ago. And there was actually one more point from this Legendary Drops video that I wanted to bring up because it's just such a great point about so many different games nowadays.
Titus and company are not the most talkative bunch, and they shouldn't be. They're Marines. It's all about the mission and killing their enemies and serving the Emperor, not their personal thoughts, opinions, or feelings. Over the last few years, it feels like every modern game and television show or movie, they're all allergic to stoicism. They can't allow characters to be silent.
I feel like this is a great point. It really is. And I think one great example a lot of people bring up, and it's hotly debated, and I'm kind of in the middle. I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but it's Kratos and how God of War took him the path from what he used to be versus what he is now in like Ragnarok, and how he's such a different character. Some people feel like it's a natural evolution. Some people really don't like that he isn't what he used to be. And I do feel like a lot of games really just offer a little too much depth to characters that don't need it. And I feel like you have a lot of writing rooms nowadays that they're like, you have to explain this, you have to give details of this, you have to give more depth to this character, you have to give them more of an identity. And I just don't feel like it works as well, especially because it ruins the identity of a lot of these iconic characters that came about 20 or so years ago.
Need a character to be complicated, to have feelings, and to need to talk about those feelings because they don't know how to tell a great story without words. I can't help but feel if this game came out from a major AAA studio, Titus would have multiple monologues in front of a mirror backed by a licensed My Chemical Romance soundtrack. Brother Gadriel would be the comic relief, and Chiron would be the true villain all along, but don't worry, he's not that bad. He's just fighting the system that separated him and his sister because, well, they wouldn't allow her to carry out her dream of being a space marine, and now he's vowed to tear down the system. Cut to a scene of him dying in Titus's arms in the rain, Titus crying out, wishing the world was different.
I mean, he's on the money with that point. And again, it's just the fact that you can't just have 3 Marines that are going about their mission for the Emperor. It has to be a lot more than that. You have to have each character having their own unique identity, their own unique mission, and then usually that factors into the overall story in which one character ruins things or becomes a big bad evil out of the middle of nowhere because it has to incite chaos or some sort of climatic event within the story. And it just gets very, very boring, very, very dull because you expect it from every single story of all of these mainstream franchises. And Warhammer doesn't run into that problem or that trap, I would say, with modern storytelling. So yeah, Space Marine 2 is pure escapism, a game that digs right into what this franchise is about and what players want. If anything, the biggest criticism I've seen is that players wish there was more of this, in terms of this game's story length, but also this entire industry, and the AAA games industry that we're being provided with. And I won't argue that there aren't other examples to look at with just masculine, mindless fun, but it does feel like it has lessened over time, and many of the existing franchises have pivoted to this for everyone mentality, which at the same time has sacrificed the identity that the core audience originally fell in love with. Saints Row is an example of that, now shut down. Suicide Squad literally goes after toxic masculinity within its story. That was funny. Battlefield provided a World War II shooter that didn't care to be historically accurate just because, according to an EA executive. Gears of War became Gears likely for marketing, and ultimately that didn't work out, and now they're going back to what the franchise was best at. Anyway, to what the Saber boss actually had to say, I do feel like, and I hope that this is a wake-up call for this AAA games industry, and I hope that there's an understanding that there is a lot of gamers that feel left behind with these current offerings, with a lot of these games with these larger-than-life ambitions, and many of them with the messaging of modern audience nonsense that nobody cares for. There's never been any proof that any of this results in actual sales, so hopefully that this is a wake-up call. Hopefully we start to see more of these experiences like Space Marine 2, like Black Myth Wukong, but only time will tell. But unfortunately, I do have my doubts, because lessons learned does not happen in this AAA games industry, as we've explored very much so the last couple of weeks. Anyway, thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, leave a comment down below with your thoughts, and consider subscribing for more videos like this. I'll see you later.